The following is a comparative analysis of the massacre of the Ghormans in Andor Season 2 versus LA street riots in response to recent immigration raids in June 2025. The Star Wars series Andor Season 2 presents a harrowing portrayal of the Ghorman Massacre, where the Galactic Empire ruthlessly suppresses dissent and rebellion through overwhelming military force.
Fire at will. Repeat. Fire at will.
We're going to begin, though, with that escalating tension in Los Angeles after protesters against federal immigration raids.
In a striking parallel, recent events in Los Angeles have seen violent clashes erupt after immigration raids, with the deployment of California National Guard and U.S. Marines against protesting civilians.
Over the objections of the governor, he did it on his own authority. California Governor Newsom condemned the action as inflammatory, called on the administration to rescind it, said they were manufacturing a crisis.
At the heart of both the Ghorman Massacre and the LA street riots is a dramatic display of state power using military force to assert control.
Tensions escalating Sunday as thousands of protesters took to the streets in response to President Donald Trump's extraordinary deployment of the California National Guard. Governor Gavin Newsom saying it was assistance he didn't ask for.
We are here to support local law enforcement, the sheriff's office, LAPD, but they didn't need that support. He made this up. This is a manufactured crisis.
While one scenario unfolds in a distant fictional galaxy and the other in contemporary America, both reflect deep and unsettling truths about state power, civil unrest, and the use of militarized force against citizens. In Andor, the Empire's decision to pull the trigger first is a calculated, brutal tactic designed to intimidate and crush any sparks of rebellion.
The LAPD mobilizing resources and LA's mayor pleading for calm.
Our city does not need to be torn apart.
Earlier Sunday, demonstrators swarming LA's federal building, hundreds of LAPD officers responding.
The Empire's soldiers massacre civilians on Ghorman, treating the population as enemies rather than citizens, to demonstrate absolute dominance and discourage future dissent. Similarly, in Los Angeles, the government's response to the protests triggered by immigration raids included the controversial deployment of the National Guard and Marines on the streets.
You can see troops are stationed along Alameda Street as another protest is expected to take place later today near City Hall. This follows President Trump's deployment of 2,000 National Guard members in response to a series
This
of
militarized response, widely criticized as illegal or excessive, sought to quell the unrest by overwhelming demonstrators with force, rather than addressing the root causes of their anger, fear, injustice, and systemic marginalization. In both cases, the authorities escalated violence first, demonstrating a preference for repression over dialogue or de-escalation. This reveals a common pattern. Governments under pressure may resort to overwhelming force to maintain order, risking civilian lives and civil liberties in the process. The Ghorman residents did not seek conflict, but were caught in the Empire's campaign of suppression. Their resistance, however, was met with lethal violence intended to eradicate opposition and instill terror. Similarly, the LA protests emerged not from a desire for chaos, but as a reaction to immigration raids that many perceived as unjust, invasive, and a violation of human rights.
Seemed to try to break through the police skirmish line.
Citizens took to the streets to voice their dissent, demanding accountability and humane treatment for immigrant communities.
Less than lethals at very close range, and you can see those projectiles being thrown over. Now that motorcyclist being hauled in here, looks like he's being arrested.
In both situations, protest becomes a symbol of marginalized communities standing up against a powerful and often indifferent authority. The initial grievances, rebellion against imperial occupation in Andor, and outrage against immigration enforcement in LA, reflect broader social tensions around oppression, rights, and identity. Both the Ghorman Massacre and the LA riots highlight the human cost of militarized responses to civil unrest. In Andor, innocent civilians are slaughtered, families destroyed, and communities traumatized. The Empire's brutality serves as a grim reminder of the consequences of unchecked authoritarian power. Likewise, the deployment of military forces in LA resulted in injuries, arrests, and fear among civilians, including vulnerable immigrant populations.
Failing to disperse. The escalation began Friday when federal immigration authorities began a series of sweeps in greater Los Angeles, arresting more than 100 people.
These actions deepen mistrust between communities and law enforcement, creating wounds that may take years to heal.
President Trump bypassing California's governor, ordering up to 2,000 guardsmen to deploy across Southern California.
In both cases, violence begets trauma, and the social fabric suffers long-term damage.
After cars were set on fire.
An important element in the Ghorman Massacre storyline is how the Empire manipulates information to downplay the massacre, framing it as a minor disturbance or a justified action against rebels.
Questions are being asked about how an insurrection of this scale could be mounted without the aid and support of outside rebel assistance. In the days to come, as the imperial martyrs of Ghorman are mourned, we're sure to learn a great deal more about what happened here today and the price we'll pay for our own safety.
This mirrors real-world tactics where governments sometimes seek to control narratives around protests and unrest, casting demonstrators as unruly or dangerous to justify harsh crackdown.
Waymo cars, people launching commercial fireworks at cops. This follows days of people throwing rocks and burning cars. These are riots in Los Angeles.
During the LA riots, media coverage showed scenes of tear gas, arrests, and clashes, while some official statements attempted to portray the protests as unlawful riots.
To make things worse. There's evidence that some of these rioters, some of these protests are funded by some of the same groups that are funding the pro-Palestinian protests.
This battle over the narrative influences public perception and affects how history will remember these events.
Burning cars, waving the Mexican flag. There's something anti-American here. It's not about simple, decent treatment of illegal immigrants.
The suppression of truth and control of narrative is a tool used in both scenarios to maintain legitimacy and mask the extent of state violence.
Encourage the riots by sort of saying, we will not let this happen here. We're against this, calling them terror tactics by ICE.
The stark similarities between a fictional massacre in a science fiction saga and real-world riots following immigration raids remind us of the cyclical nature of history and the importance of vigilance in protecting civil rights. Both scenarios warn of the dangers when governments prioritize control and order over justice and dialogue. They also underscore the power of resistance and the human spirit to demand dignity and fairness, even in the face of overwhelming oppression. While the Ghorman Massacre in Andor and the LA riots in response to immigration raids occur in vastly different contexts, their parallels are undeniable. Both reflect how governments can escalate violence to suppress dissent, how civilians respond with protest born of desperation and injustice, and how the consequences of such confrontations echo beyond the immediate moment. In examining these events side by side, viewers and observers are invited to critically assess the use of force in society and consider alternative paths toward justice and reconciliation. Ultimately, both stories compel us to ask, how can societies balance security and freedom, authority and humanity, to build a future free from fear and oppression?